title of my talk is It's the Little Things That Are Not So Little, the Art of Making Deep and Lasting Change. Before I start that, I just want to say what a luxury it is to be around so many allies. I don't know if you feel that, but it's cool. Yesterday I had so many good conversations with people from different countries, different backgrounds, and I felt inspired. I hope that during this conference I'll continue to be challenged and continue to be inspired. I'm speaking today with many hats. Some of you know that I'm a survivor. I'm someone who spent more than a decade in the mental health system with a diagnosis of schizophrenia and borderline personality disorder, and then manic depressive psychosis and schizoaffective disorder, dissociative identity disorder. If I wore all my badges, you wouldn't see me, which might be good. Again, we can talk about that later. But I also stand here as an activist, someone that wants change. I don't always get change, but I try. I stand as someone that's a development worker, someone that creates services, like many of you do, that works differently, because I can't just blog and rant about it, I need to do something. I stand here as a trainee therapist. In December, I'll actually be a therapist, which does all weird things to my identity. I work in the NHS in an amazing open dialogue team in Canterbury, and I feel so lucky to be part of changing services from within. And I'm going to speak with all of those hats today. Hopefully that will become clear. So, the title of our conference is Making Real Change Happen. I'm really mixed about our title. I love it. It inspires me. It makes me feel that by Sunday, I'll have got an idea of where I need to go to make real change happen. More than that, I'll know what real change means. And then, the more I think about it, and the more someone says, well, what is real change? We've been talking about real change for decades, for way before I joined ISPS, way before I joined the activism circuit. How much has changed? A survivor in the audience said nothing. Nothing has changed. It's still bad. So by Sunday, will we have this wrapped up? No. Maybe. So I'm kind of both excited and nervous. I'm worried that on Sunday I'll leave feeling like connected but lost. And I wonder if some of you are feeling that too. And the funny thing is, if I think, well, what needs to change? I can tell you 100 or more things right off the top of my head that need to change. And I'm guessing that if I asked each of you, in this room, there'd be thousands. The first thing that comes to mind is society. Start big. What needs to change? Well, prejudice, discrimination, victimization, childhood abuse, torture, the vilification and the victimization of immigrants and refugees, the intolerance that we have in our communities, the poverty, the exclusion, the fragmentation. Come to Rotterdam, we're going to talk about that in 2 years' time. It's that we often say people fall through the gaps in our society as if they've kind of just tippled through a crack in the road. That's crap. People don't fall through the gaps. I think they're pushed into holes by our collective unwillingness to change the fundamentals of how we work as society. It's not a person's fault that they live in poverty. It's there. We need to change racism, transphobia, homophobia, misogyny. Big words that I don't really understand the meaning of. I understand those ones, but there's many big words in society I don't really understand. Some of them are like neoliberalism. People say that and I get very confused. But we need to change that too, I'm sure of it. I think all of these things in our society are crazy-making. The mixed messages we give children to consume, to get new things, but also to be restrained and disciplined. To be beautiful, but to love yourself on the inside. All of these messages are crazy-making. All of the contradictions in our society are crazy-making. The world is not a safe place to be for many of us. This isn't my paranoia speaking. This is the lived experience of many people in the room. And it makes sense that we might, in this conference, focus on societal issues because we know from research that for many, this can be one of the things that's contributed to distress. It certainly contributed it to in my life. I can tell you that as a human being. And we can rant down the pub later in the cavern. We can write papers, we can do research. But can we change it? I don't know. I think we can. But when I start to think of all the things that need to change, what happens? I get frozen. I love to connect with other people that see it too, but I'm lost. What else do I want to change? Let's get smaller. Society's very big, isn't it? Smaller. In the mental health system, there's plenty I want to change. I want to change the medicalisation of human distress, of suffering. I want to change forced psychiatric drugging, coercion, the human rights abuses that happen in England as well as in other countries, inhumane practices that are called treatment, care and control in the same sentence that is crazy-making, for me at least. I didn't feel it was care when I was held down and injected. That felt like abuse. The lack of access to services, that people wait for years for psychological therapies, that there's no choice, that people have a postcode lottery of what is available to them, that staff, my husband's a nurse, bless him, that staff don't have the resources, the capacity, the headspace to really be there with people in a crisis, that our services are broken in so many ways. And then through my travels, when I go and meet people in different countries, I've been exposed to another level of issues in mental health services. I've been to asylums that smelt of urine, where people were tied to the bed, hosed down, treated as inhumans. And speaking to people that have experienced this makes me so lucky to live in England, because I think I have never had that. I've had many things, but I've never had that. I'm lucky. But yet I don't want to take the focus off my local community. What needs to change here? It's still important. But what about psychological therapies? Because it's so easy when I think about changing the mental health system to look outside and go, it's the overuse of medication, it's the medicalisation, that's the problem. I can just project outwards. What about within me as a psychological person? What about within my circles, within ISPS, within open dialogue, within what I really want to be more available? What needs to change here? The thing I tell people as a representative of ISPS and open dialogue is an easy answer. What we need to change is access. People do not have access to psychological therapies. We need to change range, because people don't have choices about the therapies that they get. You get CBT, you get compassion-focused therapy, you get psychodynamic, what you referred to. But choice, that's rare, unless you have money. And even now, there's this sense that some people are too ill for therapy. 15 years ago, I was told that I was too psychotic. I had too little ego strength or integration. So they would not let me near a therapist. I don't know what they thought would happen, but still, no therapy. But it's not changed as much as it needs to. I've sat in ward rounds with a young man who said that whilst we know he had trauma in his life, that you need to sort the psychosis with medication first, and then we can look at some therapy. Nothing too deep, because it will open the box. This is still within the UK system. So that's a really nice thing to campaign on. Jan Olav said we need to come together. I think that's something that almost everybody in the room will agree, choice and access. But what am I missing in focusing on that? Because when I'm thinking about society and the mental health service, I can think of lots of things that are not good there. When I think of psychological and psychotherapeutic practice, I go, there's just not enough of it. Anyone smell something funny? Okay. What needs to change here? These are my ideas. Individually, there's some things that happen in the psychotherapy room that are not good. It's a truth I feel that we need to confront. Therapists, psychological practitioners, mentors, anyone working in an intense therapeutic way with someone has a lot of power. And sometimes people misuse that power. So I know people that have been physically, sexually, emotionally, and financially abused by therapists. That sucks, right? That is horrible. And it is a very difficult reality, because how do you challenge that when you're not credible? So I know so many people that have gone through some form of abuse within therapy who have never complained about it, because who would believe a psychotic person? I myself have been emotionally abused by a therapist. This is not the inspiring talk you were signed up for. It gets better, I promise. But it's uncomfortable, but I think we should be uncomfortable. This therapist was lovely in so many ways, but after a year of her support, I was very suicidal, because she told me that I had been ritually abused. She told me that I had the most severe counter-transference reactions, and I could never, ever work with another therapist except her, because she was the only one able to help me. My whole mind was turned around. It was worse than every psychiatrist that told me I was biologically ill, that I was genetically predisposed to schizophrenia, because it got inside of me. And for a year, I accepted her as a very good, supportive therapist, and spent days and days walking around with my husband in the park, trying to understand her and go, what is it that I'm doing wrong? Because I'm feeling uncomfortable in therapy. I believed I was untherapizable, which is not a real word, but I believed it. And I have never complained about it. I feel kind of nervous saying it on camera. I've sat with the complaint form, looking at it, even a month ago, and this therapeutic relationship ended maybe 4 years ago, yet I do not feel safe to complain. What the hell is that? I'm Rai Waddingham. I stand on stages, I talk to people, I'm quite credible. But even me, I feel like I cannot complain. And I think we need to think about that. How do we make it possible for people to air concerns in therapeutic practice? But therapists that do that are the minority. I'm pretty sure, I hope, no one in the room has done that. What about a systemic level? What else do we need to change within psychotherapy, of which I am now a part? Well, we've got a dodgy history, haven't we? The use of psychological and psychotherapeutic knowledge in the development of torture techniques. That's horrific, right? Because if we know how to connect with people and we understand attachment and we understand all these things, we can use that for bad, right? The use of therapy to attempt to change someone's sexual orientation, as if someone's sexual orientation is deviant or problematic, and that was backed up by theories. In the UK, psychologists' involvement at the moment in the welfare system in access to benefits and trying to get people back to work. The stuff that's happening at the moment that really worries me and worries many of us. They're uncomfortable truths, really, really uncomfortable. But I don't really think they should surprise us because, well, remember that list of all the things that happens in society that I think we need to change? Obviously, society is something that we're part of. We are part of this whole world that has prejudice, discrimination, that has biases, that treats people badly. We're part of that. So of course, it makes its way into our theories, our practice, because we cannot separate ourselves from that. And we don't always recognise it. I'm sure the people that thought that someone's sexual orientation was deviant did not feel that that was prejudicial. They probably thought they were helping. So how do we become vigilant to the harms that we may be doing? I actually don't know. But what is it that I love about therapy? Whew, everyone kind of breathes. See, I'm doing the uncomfortable bits and then coming back out, doing the nice bits. For me, why I have engaged in therapy as a client and why I'm training as a therapist and why I devote so much time to ISPS is connection, space, the opportunity to be seen, to be heard, to be understood, and most importantly, to understand myself, to gain some ownership, some autonomy, freedom. And that's what I craved as a patient of the mental health system. When I was in hospital, when no one would speak to me because they were scared of colluding with my so-called delusions, when people avoided me, when they asked me to make a cup of tea or play Scrabble, which is a very good therapeutic intervention, it was connection that I needed. I wanted to talk. I wanted to talk as a child. But the way that I talked, the chaos that came out of my mouth, the confusing beliefs, the voices that I spoke of scared people. I think it made people feel overwhelmed, and they were overworked, and it was so easy to just not engage. I got some glimpses of connection in the mental health system. The nursing assistant, the nurse. I never saw a psychologist or a therapist. The doctor that sat by my bedside once. There was human moments within all of that, but they were so fleeting. They almost tempted me with a sense that maybe someone cares, maybe someone can hear me, and then they were taken away. The nurse that was with me, that really believed in me, rejected me because I overdosed, and for many other reasons. But she didn't have enough support to truly be with me because the system she was working in was broken. So it's connection in therapy that I think is truly healing. This openness to actually sit alongside somebody, to figure out this messiness that is being human. Like, for those of you that are therapists or practitioners, social workers, doctors, survivors, I hope that you find this messiness as inspiring and energizing as I do. I love it. I'm also scared of it because I realize I know nothing. Game of Thrones quotes, but I'm moving swiftly on. And as much as this is what I love about therapy, I think it's also the thing that can cause me the most pain sometimes in the world of psychosocial and psychological approaches. It's a source of loss because I don't always find it. To help you understand this, I want to tell you a bit of my story, if that's okay. So, I have so many experiences of misconnection. As a child, whilst being incredibly lucky to have a mum and a dad and 2 sisters and a dog, who all loved me. I think the dog loved me the most, but everyone else, I think, loved me too. Even my sisters, although they might deny it. So I was lucky. Like so many people that end up in the mental health system, I was abused by different people at different times. There's something in the way, that the method, the approach of an abuser, that for me at least was dehumanizing. I became an object in that situation because the person hurting me could not acknowledge my humanity. Because if they could, how could they do such things? So my humanity, my selfhood, my sense of being an individual was stolen from me. I didn't know it was stolen. I really didn't. What I did is fragmented to survive. I became, as I spoke about in the workshop yesterday, the best daughter, sister, student, smiley. I looked after other people. I got into fights to protect people. And I looked like a human being, but I didn't feel like one. Instead, what was inside me was the sense of deep evilness, badness, of being a monster, of being the visions that I saw, of being dangerous. I mean, how ridiculous is that as a 7-year-old, I felt that I was dangerous, that I had to protect the adults from me. And so I talked to no one about what happened. I just survived. And then at school, when I tried to mention some things, again, I wasn't heard, I wasn't met. The teacher said, "How dare you say such things? How dare you criticize your family?" My family were not the people that hurt me, but to even say, "I'm not happy at home," was met with such, "No, you're lucky." And I was lucky. My reality was denied yet again, as it is for many children today. And then, eventually, when I finally broke down, after years of self-harming, years of having an alien inside me that was growing and taking over my body, after years of feeling that I wasn't real, I went to university, and then the cameras were there. The cameras are here today. The cameras were there, but they were hidden cameras. It was part of an experiment. I was terrified, exposed. The voices were talking about me, the people that were watching me through cameras. I had nowhere to turn. And eventually, after trying to cope with it alone, I went to the mental health system. And how was I met? I was met with kindness, real kindness. But I was met with a denial of my reality. My beliefs were delusions. My voices were hallucinations. My experiences were symptoms of my illness that was lifelong. Initially, they said it was first episode psychosis and I'd go back to university, but 20 admissions later and lots of drugs that worked, but I kept stopping taking them. I was a long-term psychiatric patient with no hope of recovery. I lost myself again, but I didn't know it because I'd lost myself so many times since childhood. When I was defined by these words, these labels, these beliefs about myself, I didn't retaliate. I didn't do a Jackie Dillon and get out of hospital. I accepted it. I gave up myself, because I didn't know I had a self to keep. I wasn't worth anything. So I became the schizophrenic. I lived a life without any hope of recovery. I didn't think it was wrong that I was excluded. I didn't feel that I was subject to prejudice because everyone was right. There was something badly wrong with me. The label colluded with the abuse that I'd had as a child. And the out for me was the peer support movement, the Hearing Voices group, where I finally found that thing that we try and do in therapeutic worlds as well, space to find myself. No one could tell me what my voices are, who they are, what they mean, what I should do about it. I kind of wanted them to. I actually wanted them to get rid of them, but but no one could tell me. Yet, in the peer support group, I found people, I found connection, I found interest and curiosity. I found it for others and they found it for me. And slowly, I began to feel like a human being again. I began to have interests. I began to play music. It's actually the Hearing Voices group's fault that I performed yesterday, because they made me perform at a mental health event. For the first time in years, I rediscovered music. No stopping me now. I began to be a 360-degree human being, not a cardboard cutout of a patient. It was profoundly life-changing. I still wasn't allowed therapy because I was too ill, but that was the closest I got to it. And then, years later, when I'd managed to find my life again, to manage my voices, to understand them in some ways, to live with them, to reduce the medication that sedated me so strongly, and eventually come off the medication, I entered therapy. I had this hope for the world of therapeutic intervention, this hope of connection, this magical idea of what it would be like to be in these circles. And with some therapists and some meetings and some gatherings here, I feel that connection, that listening, that attentiveness that we can play to each other. There's times, as I've talked before, where I didn't find it. And sometimes I walk away from these conferences feeling like I have allies, friends, colleagues, equals. Sometimes I walk away with a deep sense of hurt and confusion, but unable to say what that actually is. And I think recently I've started to at least have some ideas of what that hurt and confusion might be. And if it's okay, I can share it with you. It might resonate for some people, it might not for others. And I might change my mind about it in 2 years' time, because these things should change as we think about them differently. That was the caveat. So, one of the big issues for me is the certainty of which we can speak about other people's experiences. What do I mean by that? I guess it's something I noticed in myself when I first became a facilitator of a Hearing Voices group. I became entranced by the idea that I can understand my voices and the voices of other people, that I can interpret, that I can have a story about it, to go, well, what is this and how can I help? So as a facilitator, I read Making Sense of Voices, I looked at the Maastricht interview, I looked at decoding voices and, this voice might be related to this in someone's life, and it was fascinating. Have you ever felt that? When you start to think we can make sense of these confusing experiences. But somewhere along the line, I missed this, I wonder, this tentativeness, this humbleness of what might this be linked to? And I spent some time being interpretive and going, I see it. I see what's going on for this person. I'm not necessarily going to say it, but I see it, and maybe they'll get there. How arrogant is that? Maybe they'll get there. God, this is a confessional, isn't it? But have any of you sat with someone and think you understand the source of their issues? That you've had a formulation or a theory or an idea that you know that their difficulties are linked to a specific thing that they themselves have not said? I hope that if you look inside, you realise that you probably have, because I certainly have, and people I've spoken to have. It's a very human thing to try and make sense of things. And we have theories for it. We have frameworks. And there's an issue in this, isn't there? Because human experience is not a picture that can be interpreted in a single way. It's not a 2D representation. And when we have a theory, it's like we see an aspect of human experience from a particular angle. But if we stand back and look more holistically, what we have is a 3 or a 4D thing that we've seen a fragment of. And yet when we see that fragment, we sometimes think that is the whole. And this is how I sometimes feel as a survivor within these circles and within open dialogue and within everything, within the Hearing Voices movement sometimes. Like people are seeing an echo of me, a 2D bit of me, and thinking they know what I am and who I am. The challenge with that, and the thing that I'm particularly attuned to because of my life experiences, is that that is so close to the stealing of myself that I've experienced throughout my life. Because the people doing that to me have power. They have the ability to redefine me, to say that this is transference or counter-transference or counter-counter-transference, to say that it's to do with that this voice is linked to this abuse, to make a picture of my story and give it back to me in a way that sounds so credible. It has the potential to erase what's there and stop me seeing what's there. It can be violent. And I feel it sometimes. I feel that violence. Yet, within psychiatry, I can challenge that stuff because I've got scientific arguments why I don't think schizophrenia really exists. Luckily, we're going to hear about that later. There's loads of stuff about that. But when we get into someone talking about my psychic structures or making sense of me based on the formulation, I feel like it's hard to challenge because it's so, fluid? It's hard to pin down what don't I agree with. Because in a way, they're just ideas. And yet those ideas can be spoken as if they're truths. So what is the antidote to that? Where do we go? What is the little change that I feel is a big change? Deep humility, humbleness. This is something I want to cultivate in myself as a human, as a therapist, as a survivor, as an activist. And I feel that if we can all really work towards that, something profound can change. But how can we, and I say the we because I'm part of this, how can we lose that humility, that sense of humbleness, that sense of not knowing what's inside another person? How is it that our language becomes so certain, even if in our heart we don't feel certain? How do we lose one of the ideas I had was, or this may or may not be useful, but I was wondering about this, or there's lots of different ways of approaching this, but this is an idea that I have. How did the dopamine hypothesis lose the hypothesis? Well, because we kept saying it so many times it lost its power. Maybe within psychotherapy and psychology and social approaches like the Hearing Voices Network, we can say things so often that we forget that they're just tentative ideas, that they're only as useful as they're useful. They're not real, but they can be helpful. I think we sometimes take shortcuts with language. And this is what often people have said when I've had these conversations, that they really feel it's tentative. And yet if we said everything with lots of caveats and tentativeness and gentleness within conferences, within events, within meetings, we'd spend 3 hours talking about something that could be said in 13 minutes. That's a really good point. I think that's how some of this happens. We go into closed circuits where we all know the language, and we know we don't really mean it like that. And so we miss the tentativeness. We don't take our time. But that's okay, because we all know that we don't mean it. Except if we only ever hang out with people that understand that we don't mean it. Do we start forgetting that we don't mean it? Do we stop losing the uncertainty because everyone else gets it too? Do we start to become certain? Do we start to believe our theories and believe our ideas as truth, not just helpful ways of making sense of things that help us as therapists to navigate the world? Because we need anchors, because it's so damn confusing. Is it inviting people like me. Because I'm a little unsettling, I think, occasionally, but I'm generally quite nice. And I love therapy, so I speak with love. Is it inviting people like me who speak the language of psychologists and psychotherapists that are challenging but not too uncomfortable, that helps sustain this? Am I part of the problem too? Because I can speak the language. I don't know. But it feels very human, because this is not just in therapy, this is in all forms of mental health, in all forms of life. Why am I giving you guys a hard time about it? Why do I give myself a hard time about it? And I think it's because of our power. We have such power to connect with people, to really listen and attune and attend to people, that the assumptions we make are way more powerful than someone that doesn't have those skills. And I think we have to be super, super careful. So, how do we nurture this sense of humbleness? And you might say that because I'm standing on stage, I'm not very good at it. And people that have certainly had challenging conversations with me will probably say that I'm not good at it. So I definitely count myself as someone that needs to work on it too. How do we hold the lack of certainty? How do we really come from that position of not knowing without dishing the bits we do know? Because what we know is how to connect. We do have ideas about what might be going on in someone's head, and that helps us connect and helps us do things, so we know some stuff. But how do we stop that from becoming defining the other, saying that we know what's going on in someone else? I think, for me, it's breaking out of the comfortable circles. We need comfortable circles. We need ISPS. Join ISPS if you're not a member already. Because I think we need allies around us. We need gentleness. We need space for reflection. Because how do we challenge ourselves and make ourselves vulnerable to go, well, what do I do in my practice, in my life, with my friends? How am I as a human being, as a practitioner? We need to do that in supportive, safe spaces. And that's important. But I think we need something else. I think it can be helpful sometimes to actively put ourselves in situations where we meet people that criticize us. Recovery in the bin in England. Places where survivors are not so gentle as me, that will tell us, and have told me actually, I've been told by people from Recovery in the Bin that I'm a nightmare. That's okay too, it's really painful. But it challenges me, it unsettles me. If I've got enough support, I can listen to it and I can think, where is that coming from? Like, what is it in what I've just said that has offended so many people? What is it in what I've just said that was so disrespectful? If I've got enough support, I can think about it and I can actually think about changing myself and realizing that there's something I've said that's claimed knowledge over another person and I need to do something differently. So I try sometimes to put myself in those situations, but I don't do it often enough. I spend too much time with allies because the rest of the world feels so attacking, I need my allies too. But if after this conference I can spend a little bit more time in places where I'm going to be challenged, critiqued, and if I can invite that and be open to it and be willing to hear, not to defend, I will be a better practitioner, I'll be a better human being. And I ask you guys to do the same, to invite criticism, not of you as a human being, but you as a practitioner. Because that's how I feel we can break out of the idea that we're doing okay, that we know what we're doing, because it unsettles us, and unsettling brings change under the right circumstances. And then we can come back to ISPS, we can talk about how it feels, we can invite critical voices into ISPS and not feel threatened by it, because we'll be more used to that. We need support, we need allies, but we need challenge. Whew, she says. It's not really a good suggestion, is it? It sounds terrifying, but it feels important to me. For me, it's the change that I need in myself. I'm too comfortable. I know that. It's the change I need as a new therapist. It's the change I need as a human being. And I really deeply believe that if we can cultivate this as humans, as people, as practitioners, as whatever we are, this is the little change that can grow. Because if we can be authentic, if we can be open to not knowing and to be humble, it feels that we can, when we're fighting for change, when we're looking at society, when we're looking at the mental health system, when we're looking at increasing access, as we move outwards, we take something that's quite beautiful, and that is what we would want it to be, this sense of connection and openness that I feel is core to therapy. We can actually live that, and we can make amazing changes. We can be part of building society that is not so sick, that is not so flawed. So this week, we are going to have lots of big discussions about what needs to change. We will hopefully challenge each other. We will hopefully disagree. We'll hopefully have a sense of inspiration and purpose where we feel that we've got at least a step forward. We'll be looking outwards to the big things in society that need to change and hopefully have ideas of that. We'll be looking out at the big changes in psychological therapies and increasing access. We'll be looking at the medicalisation of psychosis and the things we call psychosis. We'll be looking at categorisation systems and how they need to change, and maybe whether we need categorisation at all. It's exciting stuff, and I hope that we feel full of passion and power. But I hope we don't lose this sense of introspection, that we hold on to a little bit of this and go, let's not just look out there, let's look in here, because this is the part for me that I can control. This is the part that really matters. That's pretty much the end of my talk. And what I wanted to do is finish a bit early so that I can give you a chance to ask questions, share thoughts, share reactions, because you're going to spend a lot of time in here being talked at by people on the stage. And an hour is far too long for me to talk at you, I think. So hopefully we've got some roving mics somewhere. Hopefully. Oh, thank you.